The desperate cries of the auctioneer sliced through the dusty air of Kennewick, Arizona Territory. 1879. As Florence Garland stood trembling on the auction block, her clenched fists hidden in the folds of her worn calico dress, refusing to let any man see her fear despite the humiliation burning her cheeks red. $500 for the widow Garland, who'll pay $500 to settle the debts of her late husband. A fine woman who can cook, clean, and keep a house better than most. $500. Florence's gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to meet the hungry stares of the men gathered below. 3 months ago, she had been Mrs. Herbert Garland, wife to a supposedly successful businessman. Now, at 23, she was a widow discovering her husband's mountain of gambling debts had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a future being sold to the highest bidder. $400 then. Surely she's worth $400 to one of you fine gentlemen. The late summer sun beat down mercilessly on Florence's uncovered head. Her chestnut hair, hastily pinned that morning, was beginning to come loose. A trickle of sweat ran down her back beneath the too tight bodice, a reminder that even this dress wasn't truly hers anymore. Everything belonged to Herbert's creditors. $350. Come now, gentlemen, look at her. Young, healthy, and easy on the eyes. Florence flinched at the crude laughter from the crowd. She hadn't known such practices still existed, selling a person to cover debts. But Kennewick existed in a lawless pocket of the territory where might often trampled right. The territorial marshal was 2 days' ride away, and the local sheriff was one of Herbert's creditors. A voice called from the back of the crowd. $300. The auctioneer's face brightened. $300. Do I hear $325? $325, called another voice belonging to Barnaby Wilkes, the saloon owner. Florence's stomach twisted. Wilkes had made his intentions clear at Herbert's funeral, his meaty hand lingering too long on her shoulder as he whispered what a shame it would be for a pretty thing like her to be left all alone. $350, came another call. $400, Wilkes countered. Florence kept her eyes on the horizon, trying to imagine herself anywhere but here. The bidding continued, rising slowly but steadily. When it reached $500, only Wilkes and one other man remained in the bidding, $500 going once. The auctioneer called. All of it, a new voice declared, clear and steady. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as they parted. Florence couldn't help but look down. A tall figure stepped forward, trail dust still clinging to his denim pants and leather vest. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble. "I beg your pardon," the auctioneer asked, confusion evident in his tone. The stranger stepped closer, and Florence could now see his face clearly. He wasn't classically handsome. His nose had clearly been broken at least once, and a thin scar ran along his left jawline, but his eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. He couldn't have been more than 30. "I said all of it," the man repeated, reaching into his vest to pull out a leather pouch. "Everything I've got. $2,347, the crowd gasped. Florence felt her knees weaken beneath her. "Sir," the auctioneer stammered, "the current bid is only $500. I heard what the bid was," the stranger interrupted, his voice level but firm. "And I'm offering all I have." Wilkes pushed his way forward. "Now see here, Cowboy, that's not how an auction works." The stranger turned to face Wilkes, his hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. "The lady's not a horse or a parcel of land. She's a person, and I'm making an offer that'll clear her husband's debts and then some." Quinn Prescott," a voice called from the crowd. "Is that you, you old son of a gun?" The stranger Quinn glanced over his shoulder at an older man who was limping forward from the back of the crowd. Sam Holly's, Quinn acknowledged with a nod. Been a while. 5 years at least, Holly said. Folks, this here is Quinn Prescott, finest Mustang breaker this side of the Mississippi. If he says he's got that kind of money, he's got it. The auctioneer looked uncertainly between Quinn, Wilkes, and the sheriff who stood at the edge of the gathering. Well, Sheriff, the auctioneer asked. This would more than cover the late Mr. Garland's debts. Sheriff Wade Simmons stepped forward, his thumbs hooked in his belt. Herbert Garland owed just under $2,000 to various parties in this town, myself included. If Mr. Prescott here has the funds to cover that, I don't see why we shouldn't accept his offer. Wilkes wasn't ready to concede. This isn't legal. A woman can't just be sold to the highest bidder. That's rich coming from you, Wilkes, Quinn said quietly. Seeing as you were just trying to buy her yourself. Florence watched the exchange, scarcely daring to breathe. Quinn Prescott. The name meant nothing to her. Was trading one master for another any kind of salvation? Sheriff Simmons cleared his throat. I believe we can consider the debt settled if Mr. Prescott produces the funds. Mrs. Garland, you're free to go with him if that's your choosing. Florence found her voice at last. Do I have a choice in this matter? Quinn looked up at her, those blue eyes meeting hers directly for the first time. Yes, madam, you do. I'm offering to clear your debt. What you do after that is entirely your decision. Florence studied him, trying to discern his intentions. A stranger offering his life savings to free a woman he'd never met. There had to be a catch. Why? She asked, her voice barely audible. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Let's just say I have a problem with seeing people treated as property. The auctioneer, eager to conclude the unusual transaction, stepped in. Do we have an agreement then? Mr. Prescott will pay the sum of $2,347 to clear Mrs. Garland's debts, after which she is a free woman. Quinn nodded, still looking at Florence. If that's acceptable to Mrs. Garland. All eyes turned to her. Florence swallowed hard. What choice did she truly have? Stay in Kennewick, where Wilkes or another man would eventually get what they wanted from her. At least this stranger was offering her freedom if his word could be trusted. It is acceptable, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Within the hour, papers were drawn up in the sheriff's office. Quinn counted out his money, a lifetime of earnings from breaking and selling mustangs, and Florence's debt was officially cleared. The resentful faces of Herbert's creditors made it clear that, while they had received their due, they weren't happy about losing what they considered rightful ownership of the widow. Florence stood outside the sheriff's office, a small carpet bag containing her few remaining personal items at her feet. Quinn emerged a few minutes after her, tucking the receipt of payment into his vest pocket. Mr. Prescott, Florence said formally, I'm not entirely sure how to thank you. No need for thanks, Mrs. Garland. He retrieved a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. You must be thirsty after standing in that sun. She accepted it gratefully, taking a small sip before handing it back. Nevertheless, I am in your debt now. No, madam. That was the whole point. You're not in anyone's debt anymore. He squinted up at the sun. It's getting late. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Florence's heart sank. The home she had shared with Herbert had been seized along with everything else. No. Quinn nodded as if he'd expected this answer. I've got a camp set up about 2 miles outside town. You're welcome to stay there tonight. Tomorrow I can take you wherever you want to go. Florence hesitated. Camp with a strange man. Yet what were her alternatives? Quinn seemed to sense her discomfort. You'll have your privacy, Mrs. Garland, I give you my word. Why are you doing this? She asked again, needing to understand. Quinn picked up her carpet bag. My horse is at the livery. We should get moving if we want to reach camp before dark. Florence realized he wasn't going to answer her question, at least not yet. She followed him down the dusty main street, aware of the curious stares of townsfolk. Rumors would be flying by sunset. At the livery, Quinn paid for his horse, a magnificent dappled gray stallion, and helped Florence mount before swinging up behind her. She sat stiffly, unaccustomed to the proximity of a stranger, especially one whose arm occasionally brushed against her waist as he guided the horse out of town. The sun was low on the horizon by the time they reached Quinn's camp, nestled in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a shallow creek. It was a simple setup: a small tent, a well-established fire pit, and a few supplies neatly organized. Quinn helped her dismount, then busied himself tending to his horse while Florence stood awkwardly by the cold fire pit. "Make yourself comfortable," he said. "I'll get a fire going in a minute." Florence set her bag down and looked around. "This is where you live, for now." Quinn removed the saddle from his horse. "I move around a lot. Been working my way through the territory, catching and breaking mustangs, then selling them to ranchers or the cavalry." "And now you've given away all your money," Florence said, still struggling to understand. "For a stranger." Quinn finished with his horse and came to the fire pit, squatting down to arrange kindling. "Not all of it. Kept enough for supplies to get us where we're going." "And where is that?" Quinn struck a match and carefully lit the kindling. "That depends on where you want to go, Mrs. Garland." "Please call me Florence." He glanced up at her, the growing firelight illuminating his face. "Florence, then. I'm Quinn." As darkness fell around them, Quinn prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. They ate in relative silence, Florence's mind racing with questions she wasn't sure how to ask. Finally, as Quinn poured her a second cup of coffee, she found her courage. "You still haven't told me why you did it. Why you would give away everything you've worked for." Quinn stared into the fire for a long moment. "My mother was sold to cover my father's debts when I was 12. Different circumstances, different place, but same idea. I couldn't save her then, but I could save you today." Florence's breath caught. "What happened to her?" "Died 2 years later. Worked to death in a textile mill back east." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Florence could hear the old pain beneath it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Quinn shrugged. "It was a long time ago, and your father drank himself to death before I turned 16. Quinn took a sip of his coffee. "I headed west after that, determined to make my own way." Florence studied him across the fire. In the dancing light, the hardness of his features softened. "You've had a difficult life. No more than most." He set his cup down. "What about you? How'd you end up married to a man like Herbert Garland?" Florence tensed. "What do you know about my husband?" "Only what I heard in town today. That he was a gambler who left you with a mountain of debt." Florence stared into her coffee cup. "Herbert wasn't always that way. Or perhaps he was, and I was simply too young and foolish to see it." "How long were you married?" 3 years. She sighed. "I was 20 when we wed. He was charming, promising me a life of comfort and security. My father had just died, leaving me with little to my name." "Herbert seemed like salvation." Quinn nodded. And then I discovered that the successful businessman I thought I'd married was little more than a confidence man. He gambled, he drank, he made promises he couldn't keep." Florence blinked back unexpected tears. "When he died thrown from a horse while drunk, I thought perhaps I could finally start over. Then the creditors came. No family to turn to." She shook her head. "No one." Quinn poked at the fire. "Well, tomorrow we can figure out where you want to go. I've got business in Tucson, but I can take you wherever you need." "I have nowhere to go," Florence admitted. "No family, no friends outside of Kennewick, and I can hardly call the people there friends now." "You could come to Tucson," Quinn suggested. "It's a larger town, more opportunities for a woman looking to make her own way." Perhaps, Florence said, though the thought of arriving alone in a strange city terrified her. What business do you have there? Horse auction. I've been tracking a herd of wild mustangs. Plan to catch and break them, sell them at the auction next month. He gestured vaguely to the west. They're up in the hills about a day's ride from here. But now you don't have the money to set yourself up again, Florence said, guilt washing over her. Because of me. I've started from nothing before. Quinn's tone was reassuring. I know how to catch wild horses and I know how to break them. That's a skill that's always in demand. Florence stood suddenly, emotion overwhelming her. I've ruined everything for you. You should have let them take me. Quinn rose too, alarmed by her distress. Don't say that. It's true. Tears flowed freely now. I made my choices when I married Herbert. I should bear the consequences, not you, Florence. Quinn stepped around the fire to stand before her, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not quite touching. You didn't ask to be put in that position. No one deserves to be treated as property to be bought and sold. But your savings are just money. His voice was firm. I can earn more money. But I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd ridden away and left you on that auction block. Florence looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time not as a mysterious savior or a potential threat, but as a man who had made an extraordinary choice based on principle. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. His expression softened. Just get some rest. You can have the tent tonight. I'll sleep out here by the fire. Florence wanted to object, to insist she couldn't take his shelter, but exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her. The emotional toll of the day, the humiliation, the fear, the unexpected rescue crashed over her like a wave. Thank you, she managed, for everything. Quinn nodded, stepping back to give her space. We'll figure things out in the morning. Inside the small tent, Florence curled up on Quinn's bedroll, the scent of leather and pine surrounding her. Despite her racing thoughts, the rhythmic sound of Quinn moving around the campfire and the day's fatigue soon dragged her into a deep sleep. She woke to birdsong and the soft sounds of Quinn preparing breakfast. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was back in her own bed, Herbert still alive, the nightmare of the auction block just a bad dream. Then reality came flooding back, and with it, a surge of mixed emotions, gratitude, uncertainty, and a strange flutter of something else when she thought of the man who had given everything to save her. Florence smoothed her hair as best she could without a mirror and stepped out of the tent. The morning sun was just cresting the eastern hills, casting long shadows through the cottonwoods. Quinn crouched by the fire, frying something in a small pan. Good morning, he said, glancing up at her. Hope you slept well. Better than I expected, she admitted. What are you cooking? Bacon, last of it, I'm afraid. He gestured to a tin cup sitting on a flat rock near the fire. Coffee's ready if you want some. Florence picked up the cup, warming her hands around it. Did you sleep at all? Quinn nodded toward a rumpled blanket near the fire. Enough. They ate breakfast in companionable silence. Florence found herself studying Quinn when he wasn't looking, the careful way he handled his few possessions, the quiet competence in his movements, the thoughtful expression that settled on his face when he gazed into the distance. I've been thinking, she said as they finished their meal. About your mustangs. Quinn raised an eyebrow. What about them? You said they're a day's ride from here, that you were planning to catch and break them for the Tucson auction. That was the plan, he agreed. Before. Florence set her plate down. I want to help you. Quinn looked genuinely surprised. Help me what? Catch the mustangs, break them. Get you back at least some of what you lost. Quinn shook his head. Florence, that's not necessary. It is to me, she interrupted. I can't repay what you gave, not in money, but I can help you rebuild. It's dangerous work, he warned, and hard. Harder than anything you've likely done before. I'm stronger than I look, Florence insisted. I grew up on a small farm in Missouri. I know horses, and I'm a quick learner. Quinn studied her for a long moment. Why? Why not just take the chance to start fresh in Tucson or somewhere else? Florence met his gaze steadily. Because I owe you a debt, whether you acknowledge it or not, and because I have nowhere else to go and nothing else to offer. Quinn considered this, then slowly nodded. All right, we'll try it. But at the first sign it's too much for you, you tell me. Deal. Deal. Florence smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had a purpose now, something to work toward. They packed up camp efficiently, Quinn giving instructions that Florence followed willingly. By mid-morning they were on the trail, Florence again riding double with Quinn. This time, she sat more comfortably, less rigid with fear and uncertainty. As they rode, Quinn explained his method for catching and breaking mustangs. We'll set up a new camp near where I've been tracking the herd. There's a natural box canyon in the area perfect for driving them into. Once we've got them penned, the real work begins. How many horses are in this herd? Florence asked. Last I counted, about 15, led by a big black stallion. That's going to be a challenge. Quinn's voice held respect for the animal. If I can break him, he alone would fetch enough to make the venture worthwhile. They rode through increasingly rugged terrain, the landscape transitioning from desert flats to rocky foothills. By late afternoon, they had ascended enough that Florence could feel the difference in the air, cooler and crisp with the scent of pine. There, Quinn said, pointing to a narrow valley between two rocky ridges. That's where I've been tracking them. And there, he indicated a gap in the northern ridge, that leads to the Box Canyon. They made camp in a sheltered grove, close enough to observe the valley but far enough away not to spook any horses that might come through. Quinn worked quickly to set up a more substantial camp than the previous nights, explaining they might be here for several weeks. The first step is patience, he told Florence as they built a fire pit together. We need to learn their patterns when they come to water, which paths they follow. Then we can set our trap. Over the next 3 days, Florence and Quinn observed the Mustang herd from hidden vantage points. True to his word, Quinn was patient, teaching Florence to read the signs of the horse's movements, tracks, droppings, disturbed vegetation. They spoke little during these observation periods, but in the evenings by the campfire they gradually shared more of their lives. Florence told Quinn about her childhood in Missouri, her father's small farm, and how his death had left her vulnerable to Herbert's false promises. Quinn shared stories of his years on the frontier, his first job as a stable boy for a cavalry outpost, learning to break horses from an old Comanche man, the seasons spent tracking and capturing wild mustangs. On the 4th morning, they spotted the herd entering the valley below. Florence gasped at the sight. 15 magnificent wild horses, led by the impressive black stallion Quinn had described. They moved like water flowing over the landscape, powerful and free. They're beautiful, she whispered. Quinn nodded, a gleam of appreciation in his eyes. Freedom always is. As the days passed, Florence proved her worth around camp. She cooked, mended Quinn's torn shirt, and quickly learned the basics of setting snares that supplemented their dwindling supplies with fresh rabbit. More importantly, she demonstrated a natural affinity with horses that surprised even Quinn. When they captured their first Mustang, a young mare that had wandered away from the main herd, Florence's gentle approach helped calm the frightened animal faster than Quinn's more traditional methods. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, watching as Florence spoke softly to the tethered mare, gradually getting close enough to stroke its neck. "My father believed horses responded better to kindness than force," she explained. "He taught me that if you can earn their trust, they'll give you their loyalty." Quinn watched thoughtfully. Most men I've known break horses with dominance. And how has that worked for the horses? Or the men? Florence asked pointedly. Quinn chuckled. Point taken. By the end of the second week, they had formulated their plan to drive the main herd into the box canyon. Quinn had constructed a rudimentary corral at the canyon's mouth, using fallen trees and rope. Florence had helped, showing unexpected strength and stamina that earned Quinn's admiring glances more than once. The night before they planned to execute their trap, they sat by the fire, the tension of anticipation hanging between them. "Are you nervous?" Florence asked, noticing how Quinn repeatedly checked his lariat. "Always am before a big drive," he admitted. "If it goes wrong, horses can get hurt, people too." Florence nodded, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "What if we only take some of them?" "Leave the rest free." Quinn looked at her curiously. "That would defeat the purpose of all this work." "Would it?" she challenged gently. "You said yourself the black stallion alone would fetch a good price, and perhaps a few others. But does every wild thing need to be captured?" Quinn was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "You're an unusual woman, Florence Garland. Is that good or bad?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Good," he said definitively. "Definitely good." Their eyes met across the flames, and Florence felt that strange flutter in her chest again. In the firelight, Quinn's features seemed softer, his eyes reflecting golden sparks. He was no longer just her rescuer or a business partner in this venture. He was becoming something more, something that both excited and frightened her. Quinn cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will test us both." Florence nodded, rising to retire to her side of the camp. Quinn had built her a small lean-to after the first few days, giving her privacy while he continued to sleep under the stars. As she settled onto her bedroll, she found herself wondering what it would be like to be held in those strong arms that so gently handled wild horses. The next morning dawned clear and cool. They ate a quick breakfast in focused silence, then saddled Quinn's horse. "Remember the plan," Quinn said as they rode toward their predetermined positions. "I'll drive them from the south. You'll be stationed at the eastern ridge to keep them from breaking in that direction. All you need to do is make noise and wave that blanket when they come near you." Florence nodded, clutching the old blanket Quinn had given her. He left her at her position, a rocky outcrop overlooking the path the mustangs typically followed, then rode off to circle behind the herd. Florence waited, her heart pounding with anticipation. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the rocks beneath her. An hour passed, then another. Just as she began to worry something had gone wrong, she heard the distant thunder of hooves. Over the rise came the mustang herd, running at full gallop with Quinn behind them, waving his hat and shouting. Florence held her breath at the magnificent sight, manes and tails flying, muscles rippling beneath glossy coats. The black stallion led them, his head high, nostrils flared. As the herd approached the point where they might veer east, Florence jumped up, waving her blanket and shouting as instructed. The lead horses faltered, then veered west, exactly as planned. The rest of the herd followed, all except the black stallion. With a high-pitched whinny of defiance, he broke from the others, charging directly toward Florence's position. She froze, the blanket dropping from her suddenly nerveless fingers. The stallion was coming too fast, too directly. "Florence, get down!" Quinn's shout barely registered. The stallion reached the base of her rocky perch and reared, powerful hooves pawing at the air mere feet below her. Florence stumbled backward, lost her footing on the uneven surface, and felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Quinn had abandoned the drive to race to her side, arriving just in time to break her fall. They tumbled together, Quinn taking the brunt of the impact. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands moving over her shoulders, checking for injuries. "No," Florence gasped, still stunned by the speed of events. "The horses, damn the horses," Quinn said fiercely. "I thought he was going to trample you." The black stallion had galloped off, but the rest of the herd had continued into the canyon as planned. The makeshift gate had swung closed behind them, trapping at least a dozen mustangs. "We did it," Florence said, looking toward the canyon. "Well, most of it." Quinn helped her to her feet, his hands lingering on her waist longer than strictly necessary. "That was too close." "I'm fine," she assured him, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. "Thanks to you." They walked toward the canyon entrance where the captured mustangs milled about nervously. Quinn surveyed them with a professional eye. 11 of them, he calculated. Good stock, too. Should fetch a fair price in Tucson. "But not the black stallion," Florence noted. Quinn shook his head. "He'll be back. He won't abandon his herd for long." They spent the remainder of the day securing the corral and beginning the slow process of approaching the captured horses. By nightfall, Florence was exhausted, muscles aching from the unaccustomed work, but filled with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. Over the next 2 weeks, Quinn taught Florence the art of breaking horses not through brutality but through patience and persistence. She proved to be a natural, her gentle touch winning over even the most skittish mares. Quinn worked with the more challenging males, though always employing less force than Florence had expected. "You've changed your methods," she observed one evening as they watched a young colt tentatively eating from Quinn's hand. Quinn stroked the colt's forehead. "Maybe I needed to be reminded there's more than one way to earn trust." Their days fell into a rhythm rising with the sun, working with the horses through the day, sharing quiet evenings by the fire. The black stallion returned as Quinn had predicted, lingering on the ridge above the canyon, watching his captured herd. Quinn made several attempts to trap him, but the clever animal evaded every snare. "He's earned his freedom," Florence said after Quinn's 4th failed attempt. "Don't you think?" Quinn sighed, coiling his lariat. "You're getting soft on me, Florence," she laughed. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I just recognize a kindred spirit." Quinn looked at her curiously. "How so? He refuses to be captured, despite the cost." Florence gazed up at where the stallion stood silhouetted against the sky. "He values his freedom above all else, as do I now." Quinn was quiet for a moment. "And what will you do with your freedom once we reach Tucson?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Florence had been avoiding thinking about their eventual parting, about what would happen when they reached civilization and sold the horses. "I don't know," she admitted. "Fine work, I suppose. A boarding house, perhaps, or a shop." Quinn nodded, his expression unreadable. "You do well at whatever you chose." As the days passed, the captured mustangs grew increasingly accustomed to human contact. Several were now halter-broken, and Quinn had begun saddle training with the most promising ones. Florence had taken special interest in a dappled gray mare, gentling her to the point where she would follow Florence around the corral like a devoted dog. "She's yours," Quinn said one evening, watching Florence brush the mare's coat. Florence looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean when we sell these horses that one isn't for sale. She's yours." Quinn's expression was earnest. "Every woman needs her own horse in this country." Florence felt tears spring to her eyes. "Quinn, I can't accept you earned her," he interrupted. "Fair and square, your share of this venture." Florence stroked the mare's neck, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Thank you." That night, a storm rolled in from the west, bringing driving rain and fierce winds. Their camp, though well constructed, offered limited protection from the elements. Florence huddled in her lean-to, listening to the rain hammer against the canvas covering. A sudden gust ripped part of the covering away, sending cold rain pouring onto her bedroll. She gasped at the shock of it, scrambling to save her few belongings from the deluge. "Florence?" Quinn appeared at the entrance, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Come on, this isn't going to hold." He helped her gather her things and led her to his own shelter, a more substantial lean-to built against a rock face. Inside, it was relatively dry, though cramped with both of them. "I'm sorry," Florence said, shivering. "I should have secured it better." Quinn draped a dry blanket around her shoulders. "Not your fault. Nature reminds us who's in charge sometimes." They sat side by side in the small space, listening to the storm rage outside. Florence's wet clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin, and despite the blanket, she couldn't stop shivering. "You need to get out of those wet things," Quinn said practically. "I'll turn around." Florence hesitated, then nodded. Quinn dutifully turned his back while she struggled out of her sodden dress, quickly wrapping herself more securely in the blanket. Her undergarments were damp but not soaked through. "I'm decent," she said when she was done. Quinn turned back, took her wet dress, and hung it from a rope strung across one corner of the shelter. The intimate domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on Florence, this man handling her clothing with such casual care. "You're still shivering," he observed, concern etching his features. "I'll be fine," she insisted, though her teeth chattered with the words. Quinn hesitated, then moved closer. "Body heat," he explained awkwardly, "if you're comfortable with it." Florence nodded, too cold to pretend propriety mattered more than warmth. Quinn carefully put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. The immediate heat of his body was like a blessing, and she found herself leaning into his embrace. "Better?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. "Yes," she whispered, acutely aware of their proximity, of the steady rise and fall of his chest against her shoulder. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the small shelter. In that brief, bright moment, Florence looked up to find Quinn watching her, an expression in his eyes she hadn't seen before, or perhaps hadn't allowed herself to see. "Florence," he said, her name almost a question on his lips. She didn't know who moved first, perhaps they both did, but suddenly his mouth was on hers, gentle at first, then with growing urgency as she responded. His hand cradled her face, thumb brushing her cheek with unexpected tenderness. When they broke apart, both breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you helped gentle that first mare." Florence smiled, her heart racing. "Only then. I've wanted it since you caught me when I fell." Quinn laughed softly, drawing her closer. "We're a pair of fools, wasting all this time." The storm raged through the night, but Florence barely noticed, lost in the discovery of Quinn's kisses, in the careful exploration of touch and whispered confessions. They didn't go beyond those kisses and caresses, both silently acknowledging boundaries that, for now, would remain, but something fundamental had shifted between them. Morning brought clear skies, and the realization that their time in this mountain sanctuary was coming to an end. The horses were nearly ready for the journey to Tucson, and their supplies were dwindling. "We should leave tomorrow," Quinn said as they assessed the damage from the storm. "The horses are as ready as they'll get, and we need to reach Tucson before the auction." Florence nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Their mountain idol had become precious to her, this place where she had discovered her strength and, unexpectedly, her heart. "Florence," Quinn said, reading her expression, "this isn't ending, not unless you want it to." She looked up at him. "What do you mean?" Quinn took her hands in his. "I mean that I don't want to just deliver you to Tucson and ride away. I want—" He paused, suddenly uncertain. "I want to see what we could be together." Florence felt warmth spreading through her chest. "I'd like that too." They spent their final day in the mountains preparing for the journey. The captured mustangs, now accustomed to halters and basic commands, would be led in a string. Florence would ride her gray mare, which she had named Liberty, while Quinn rode his stallion and led the train of horses. That evening, as they sat by their last campfire in the mountains, Quinn grew unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" Florence asked, moving to sit beside him. "The future," he admitted. "What happens after Tucson?" "And what does happen?" Quinn poked at the fire. "That depends on what you want, Florence." She studied his profile in the firelight. "I want to be free, and I want to be with you. Can I have both?" Quinn turned to her, taking her hand. "That's exactly what I want to offer you. Partnership, not ownership. Freedom to choose every day." Florence felt tears prick her eyes. After years of Herbert's control, of feeling trapped, Quinn's words were more precious than any declaration of undying love. "I choose you," she whispered. "Today and tomorrow, and we'll see about the day after." Quinn's smile was radiant. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that glinted in the firelight, a simple silver band. "I've been carrying this for a week," he confessed. "Found it in the pocket of an old shirt. It was my mother's." He held it out to her. "Not as a chain, but as a promise. When we reach Tucson, if you still choose me, I'll ask you properly." Florence took the ring, her fingers trembling. "I don't need Tucson to know my mind." They left at dawn, the string of mustangs trailing behind them as they descended from the mountains. Florence rode her mare with newfound confidence, the silver band hanging from a leather cord around her neck, not yet on her finger, but a promise for their future. The journey to Tucson took 5 days, traveling at the pace the mustangs could manage. They camped each night under the stars, their bedrolls now placed side by side. Their kisses grew more urgent, their touches more intimate, but both agreed some things were worth waiting for until they could start their new life properly. Tucson in 1879 was a growing frontier town, busy with commerce and opportunity. Florence felt overwhelmed by the noise and bustle after weeks in the wilderness, but Quinn's steady presence beside her kept her grounded. They found rooms at a respectable boarding house, Quinn insisting on separate accommodations despite their engagement. "I want to do right by you," he explained when Florence teased him about his sudden propriety. "Besides, it's only for a few days." The horse auction was scheduled for the following week, giving them time to properly groom and prepare their mustangs. Word spread quickly about the quality of Quinn's horses, and several buyers approached him with private offers before the auction even began. On auction day, their mustangs fetched excellent prices, far better than Quinn had hoped. By afternoon's end, they had earned nearly $3,000, more than replacing Quinn's original savings. "You did it," Florence marveled as they counted the money in Quinn's room that evening. "You've got your life savings back." "We did it," Quinn corrected her. "And it's our savings now." The next morning, they visited a small church on the outskirts of Tucson. The elderly pastor asked few questions, blessing their union with simple words that belied their profound meaning. Florence wore a new dress of soft blue calico, purchased with their first earnings. Quinn had splurged on a new shirt and had actually visited the barber. As he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, Quinn looked into Florence's eyes with a certainty that took her breath away. "Freedom and love," he whispered for her ears alone. "That's my promise to you." "Freedom and love," she repeated, sealing the vow with a kiss. They left Tucson a week later, heading west toward California. Quinn had heard of good land available near San Diego, where a man might start a modest horse ranch. Florence rode beside him on Liberty, no longer behind him or following him, but alongside as an equal partner. As they crested a hill overlooking the desert stretching before them, Florence reined in her mare. "Look," she said, pointing to the horizon where a small herd of wild horses galloped freely across the plain. Leading them was a magnificent black stallion. Quinn laughed in disbelief. "It can't be." "Whether it is or isn't," Florence said, "it's a good omen, don't you think? Freedom finding its way west just like us." Quinn reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "Just like us." They made their way to California by autumn, establishing a small ranch in a fertile valley east of San Diego. Using their auction earnings, they purchased 50 acres with access to water and good grazing land. Quinn built their cabin himself, with Florence working alongside him, laying claim to their future with every nail and board. Over the next year, they established a reputation for fair dealing and exceptional horses. Quinn's method of breaking mustangs gentler than most produced mounts that were both spirited and reliable. Florence's natural affinity with the animals complemented his skills perfectly. They named their ranch Liberty Run, in honor of the gray mare and the freedom they'd both fought for. A small brass plaque bearing the name hung beside their door, a wedding gift from Sam Hollies, who had followed them west and become their first hired hand. When Florence discovered she was expecting their first child, Quinn built an addition to their cabin, a nursery with a window facing east. "So the little one can see the sunrise," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. Their son, Franklin Quinn Prescott, was born on a spring morning in 1881, with the scent of wildflowers drifting through the open windows. Quinn held him with hands that trembled slightly, marveling at the tiny fingers and determined expression. "He has your spirit," Quinn told Florence, who watched them from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "And your stubbornness," she countered with a smile. As Franklin grew, so did Liberty Run. By his third birthday, they had expanded to 100 acres and built a proper ranch house. Their Mustang breeding program had gained recognition throughout Southern California, drawing buyers from as far away as San Francisco. In 1885, Florence gave birth to twin girls, Abigail and Rose. Quinn, now an experienced father, took to caring for the infants with the same patient determination he showed with his wildest mustangs. "You're a natural," Florence told him one evening, finding him in the nursery with a daughter sleeping on each shoulder. "Had a good teacher," he replied, nodding toward her. "You showed me patience works better than force, remember?" Florence smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "With horses and children at least." "With everything worth having," Quinn corrected. "Life wasn't always easy." Droughts threatened their water supply. Economic downturns affected horse prices, and the twins caught scarlet fever the winter they turned two, leaving the family sleepless with worry for weeks. But through it all, Quinn and Florence faced challenges together, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. They never returned to Kennewick, though occasionally news reached them through traveling merchants or old acquaintances. They learned that Barnaby Wilkes had eventually lost his saloon in a card game and left town in disgrace. Sheriff Simmons had been voted out of office after evidence of his corrupt dealings came to light. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Florence with a special gift, the deed to Liberty Run, transferred solely into her name. "Quinn, what is this?" she asked, confused as she read the document. "Insurance," he explained, sitting beside her on the porch swing of their ranch house. "So that no matter what happens to me, you and the children will always have a home that's yours alone. No one can ever take it from you." Florence set the deed aside and took his hands. "Nothing is going to happen to you, and everything we have we built together." "I know." Quinn smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with the expression. At 40, his hair had threads of silver at the temples, but he was still as strong and vital as the day he'd ridden into Kennewick. But I remember a woman on an auction block, and I never want you to be vulnerable like that again." Florence leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it? Spending your life savings on a stranger?" Quinn kissed the top of her head. "Best investment I ever made." As twilight settled over Liberty Run, their children's laughter drifted from the barn where Franklin, now 8, was showing his sisters the new foal. Beyond the fence line, horses grazed peacefully on land that had flourished under their care. "We've come a long way from that auction block," Florence murmured. "And that mountain camp," Quinn added. "Would you do it again?" Knowing everything that would follow, Quinn turned to face her, taking her face gently between his calloused hands. "Every moment, every struggle, every joy." He kissed her softly. "Freedom and love, remember." "Freedom and love," Florence repeated against his lips. The promise as true now as it had been that day in Tucson, when a widow with nothing and a cowboy who'd given everything had chosen to build a life together, a life where neither would ever be owned, but both would forever belong.